Hello everyone, welcome back to Daska Discusses. Today I thought, well, since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood's coming out soon, Tarantino's new film, I thought, why not review, or start reviewing, some of my favourite Quentin Tarantino films. And I'm going to start off with, well, his first feature film, Reservoir Dogs. Let's do this. I'm hungry. Let's get a taco. Now obviously before I start this review, just a reminder that there is some major spoilers in this, so if you haven't seen Reservoir Dogs, I wouldn't suggest you watch furthermore. Now released in 1992, Quentin Tarantino's first feature film, you could say, Reservoir Dogs, revolves around a jewelry heist with some ex-cons, criminals, and obviously a gang leader who basically puts these guys together in a room and says, okay, we're going to rob a jewelry store, and everyone's got these aliases, don't tell anyone your name, and we'll see where it goes from there. The thing is about Reservoir Dogs is that, obviously before Pulp Fiction, you can imagine that Reservoir Dogs, I think, is in Tarantino's top films of all time. Now, why is that? Let's look at the storyline, for example. Well, you've got these ragtag ex-cons who meet up, are all part of this whole crew that need to rob this jewelry store. Now the thing is, the way Tarantino tells the story is quite fantastic, and it was a little glimpse as to what was going to be with Pulp Fiction. And I'm not saying he was the first person to use the whole use of flashbacks and flash forwards, etc., but the way it's used in Reservoir Dogs is a nice little glimpse into Pulp Fiction, which we'll talk about another time. Now looking at the storyline, being introduced to the way it actually starts as well, you got Mr. Orange and Mr. White, Harvey Keitel and Tim Roth in the car there, he's bleeding, we don't know what's happened, we don't know what's going on, and then they're driven to a hideout point where he's sitting there still bleeding, and then you've got Mr. Pink who rocks up, Steve Buscemi, and they begin explaining to the audience what's actually unfolded. The jewelry store heist, something went wrong, the cops showed up, is there a rat in the house, all that kind of stuff. Now, it's there that the tension begins, where the audience is sitting there thinking, okay, cool, well, we're put into this situation, we're here now, who actually is the rat? Now, I've only met a few characters up until this point, but that's where it all comes into it. You've got this epic kind of conversation between Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi, Mr. Pink and Mr. White, and they're trying to explain what happened and how did they get out of this situation. And then we've got our first flashback to Steve Buscemi, who's running away from the cops after the jewelry store heist. And from that, throughout the film, you get a lot of flashbacks like these, not only to the jewelry store heist, but also to the key characters. You also get a background as to Mr. White's persona and what happened beforehand. So Harvey Keitel's character, we're given a flashback to, I guess, his meeting with the big boss, Lawrence Tierney, Joe, and Nice Guy Eddie, his son, and they're asking him, do you want to be part of this jewelry store heist? Okay, so you're given that info slowly throughout the film. You're given these little glimpses and little flashbacks. It happens with Mr. Blonde as well, Michael Madsen's character. Again, we find out that he's a family friend of Joe and Nice Guy Eddie, and did time in prison for whatever reason it was back then, and they ask him, do you want to be part of this jewelry store heist as well? That's further on in the film. So throughout the film, it's split up into the hideout, what's happened there, how they're going to find out who the rat is, then you've got flashbacks to giving us more info about the characters in the film, and then even more so, it goes back to what's happening in the present time. When we understand that obviously Mr. Orange is being shot, and when we get his flashback sequence, we figure out through this dialogue with another character that he's actually the undercover cop in this whole crew. And from there, you're like, okay, cool, well, we know that. It's about 3/4 of the way in the film. It's right near the end where we find out that info that he's the cop, and in order to portray, I guess you could say, his character to all these, the gangster bosses and everyone else, to make sure that he's actually real as it seems, you're given this whole sequence of the commode story. Now, a lot of people, I've got friends of mine that find this sequence quite boring, where he has to learn this whole story or this anecdote that happened to him when he was, like a fake anecdote that happened to him when he was dealing or something like that. I think this whole sequence is great, and it's so Tarantino, where you've got the storyline happening, these flashbacks, and then all of a sudden you're thrown into this all different kind of subplot of Mr. Orange's story of, walking into a bathroom with a bag full of, illegal substances, and then there's 4 cops and a dog sitting there barking at him, and how he gets out of that. And he tells that to his future crew that he'll be working with, and they believe it. So I think it's a really good character construction and development in that, and a lot of people found that part of the film quite slow. I think it's actually useful, because you've got the flashbacks to Harvey Keitel's character, to Michael Madsen's character. With Mr. Orange, it goes on a bit longer, and you know what's at stake. you know from beforehand that he's been shot, and then having seen all this and figuring out that he's the undercover cop, and then we're shown even furthermore down near the end of the film how he got shot and how he actually killed a civilian as well. So you see that in his face when that happens. He's quite disturbed by that. But he's the guy that's bleeding there. He's the one that Mr. White has been looking after. Mr. Pink is all freaking out. Steve Buscemi, we'll talk about the acting in a second. But that really leads to the tension involved in the whole storyline. Now with all that, you've got some characters who are given their story a lot throughout the film. So I guess you could say Mr. White, Mr. Blonde, and Mr. Orange. Other characters like Mr. Brown and Mr. Blue, you don't get too much of a storyline for them as well. I mean, Mr. Brown does give his first speech, you know, the Like a Virgin speech, and an epic opening sequence and epic conversation there. How Tarantino starts off a film like this, you'd be thinking as a normal audience member back then, I thought this was meant to be like an action film or a jewelry store heist, but it's just a conversation about Madonna. It's a conversation about tips and waitresses and how, you know, Mr. Pink doesn't want a tip, etc. There's some great acting in that, which we'll talk about later on as well. Now, the film does have some, I guess you could say, some dark moments in it and some quite graphic, violent scenes. Not totally graphic. I mean, these days it's probably not that bad, but with Mr. Blonde, you know, Michael Madsen's character playing that quite psychopathic kind of role, and what happens to the police officer as well with, you know, Steeler's wheel and, you know, the dancing and the ear, you know, which scene I'm talking about, it can be quite disturbing. But remember that the camera does pan away from it, so you don't actually see the violent part that actually happens. You do see the aftermath, which again is quite disturbing for some viewers. I get that. Now, how the storyline all connects all together through the use of these flashbacks and going back to the hideout, and then Joe finally rocks up with Nice Guy Eddie, and you've got this standoff where Joe actually says, I know who the rat is, and he points to Mr. Orange, and then there's a standoff there with Mr. White saying, you know, it wasn't him, you know, I repeat, drop the gun, if you shoot, I will shoot you first, you will die, or whatever it happens. And then it's quite, the tension is high, and then all of a sudden, bang, you've got this Mexican standoff that happens, and then bang, 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 all these gunshots go off, and they're all dead on the ground. Now, that's where, back in the day, you got the whole thing with rewinding the tape, the VHS, finding out who shot who, and there's famous t-shirts about who shot Nice Guy Eddie. Well, you can look that up and find out yourself, but yeah, you work out who shot who, and then Mr. Pink runs out with the diamonds. We think that he gets away. And then the cops storm in, you've got Mr. Orange still bleeding and dying, and then Mr. White who's been shot, and then it ends on that black screen of the gunshot. And then it goes to the coconut song, which I love as well. But that final sequence with that Mexican standoff is remembered now. I think it's one of the greatest scenes in any Tarantino film. The way it builds up to that, and the way the audience is thinking what's actually going to happen. You do not expect everyone to just get shot and die. And it ends badly. But I guess you could say that Tarantino was trying to show us that, you know, this jewelry store heist that was meant to be all perfect and clear, well, no, there was a rat in the house, and then everything just crumbles and everyone dies. It's a great, not Shakespearean look at things, but I think the way it's all played out with the storyline, it's fantastic. The use of flashbacks, the more info on the characters, it is brilliant. Now let's talk about Quentin Tarantino's use of cinematography and production design in this. I would say that the way he uses the camera as well, a lot of medium close-ups, a lot of close-ups as well in this, especially in the first, like I could say, first quarter of the film, where you've got Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi sitting there talking about what happened and where was the rat. You're still given a few wide shots to see this hideout and see that it does look like a hideout. They filmed on location, which is actually quite awesome as well. But these use of these slow dolly zooms in, the close-ups, the medium close-ups, it's awesome how they do it because, again, it raises the tension in the scene as well. And these guys are brilliant actors. Buscemi, Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth, all doing a great job with what they've got a suit on, there's a few blood stains on them, and they're sitting there, and the dialogue is key. Now that's the whole key to the film, and the acting deals with a well-written script, obviously. Now talking about the acting, it's an all-star cast. You've got Harvey Keitel, Tim Roth in there, Steve Buscemi, Michael Madsen, Lawrence Tierney as Joe, Nice Guy Eddie, even, you know, Quentin Tarantino's in there as a bit of a cameo at the start, we know that as well. But with all these guys in there, I mean, I love Harvey Keitel. You know, Mean Streets with Robert De Niro. He's just a brilliant actor. One of my favorite parts and some great acting is between Harvey Keitel and Steve Buscemi in that first part of the film when Mr. Pink finally goes into the hideout and they're discussing who the rat is. You know, they're talking about certain things. and then it flashes back a little bit to how Mr. Pink got out, and then it goes back to the hideout. Mr. Pink starts basically, you know, accusing that, you know, he could be the rat, Mr. Orange could be the rat, and tension goes up higher and higher, and they start fighting, and then they pull their guns on each other. That is great acting, because it starts off as a real kind of low burn where they're sitting there, they're stressed out, yes, but then it rises to the point where these guys are actually going to shoot each other. And that's where the film, I think, stands in terms of acting. It's that it's funny as well, some good humorous parts in it, there's some funny jokes in it as well, but also the fact that these guys are believable as gangsters and ex-cons. I mean, really, talking about Mr. Blonde's character, Michael Madsen, he plays this role really well, and it shows again in Kill Bill as well, where he's got this whole quiet kind of persona, and then we find out what he's actually done at the jewelry heist where he shoots all these people, where again, you think, oh, this guy actually did it, but deep down he is a psychopath. We don't see any of this violence, but we are told it. And then it gets even worse when he basically starts torturing the police officer as well, in a memorable scene with Steelers Will playing in the background. And the way he does it, the way he goes about torturing this guy and then walking back to his car, getting the gasoline, pouring it on him. It is a quite disturbing scene, but in terms of acting between him and the cop as well, it's great acting. And then, well, he meets his demise through Mr. Orange, who actually shoots him. I probably saw this when I was probably about, I don't know, it came out in 1992, so I probably would have been about 14, 15. Again, I appreciated it for it being a lot different to other action films. It's really heavy on dialogue. Some people these days might find that it's a bit slow. Well, to them I say, look, it's not everyone's type of film. The dialogue is quite heavy in the film, but that's the whole thing. The writing in this film and the dialogue and the script and the storyline, it captivates the audience. It brings you in through this great writing that Tarantino had. Now, this is all relevant. This is all evident as well in Pulp Fiction, where he took out the best Oscar for best screenplay as well. So Tarantino knows how to write dialogue. And these days with the audience, if you're not into that type of film, then you probably won't enjoy it. But for me, it was fantastic. And the actors in this, they're iconic and they're memorable, okay? Few have tried to replicate Reservoir Dogs, but you're not going to get this band of actors together in one room again. It would be awesome if they did. I'm looking forward to The Irishman as well, which will have De Niro, Pacino, directed by Scorsese, but also Joe Pesci. That's what I think that could work out well too. And some of the one-liners in this, you know, I'm not going to repeat them all here, but one of my favorite ones is by Mr. Blonde, who basically asked Mr. White, Harvey Keitel, he goes, "Are you going to bark all day, little doggy, or are you going to bite?" I think that's a great line as well, and it's memorable for me, plus so many other ones as well. Let's get a taco, come on. Each one of these guys, Buscemi, Roth, Keitel, even Tarantino, you know, Michael Madsen, they all play their role really well, and they all have a distinct character trait. Lawrence Tierney, who's plays Joe as well, the boss, I think he's great. I love his cameo in Seinfeld as well. "What are you doing there for? How would you like to work on another job? Who didn't leave a tip? Hey, no one's changing any names." Chris Penn, playing Nice Guy Eddie, also plays a great role in this as well. The iconic tracksuit pants and the big mobile phone that he's got as well. And to finalize everything, look, the soundtrack, I mentioned that before, is fantastic. The acting in this is fantastic as well. The storyline works well. For Tarantino's first major feature film, it was a great way to introduce the world to his style of directing. I'm a big fan of it. I'll start reviewing other Tarantino films before Once Upon a Time in Hollywood comes out. But my final verdict for Reservoir Dogs, I'm going to give it a solid 9 out of 10. Guys, I hope you enjoyed watching. Please, if you want to hit like, if you like the video, please comment and let me know what you thought of the video. And if you want to subscribe, if you haven't already, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell so you're up to date with all my videos. I'll see you guys on the next time on Daska Discusses. Boom!